Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and fine, the agency didn't send me.
Hi, I'm Daniel Dresner, and I do like green glowing things.
Welcome to Space the Nation, where we look at science fiction through the lens of
power transition theory
and negentropy. Today we'll be talking about N.D. Stevenson's Nimona, which is available at fine book purveyors and comic book stores everywhere, as well as digitally. But who would want to read it digitally, I ask you?
Yeah, you want the actual pages on this one.
Yeah, let's talk about actual pages in a second here. First, I want to tell our friends that we are going to be talking about Jupiter Ascending next week, which will be a blast. We haven't had a movie like this in a while. Well, there aren't a lot of movies like this. Actually.
Does this qualify? I think it's safe to say that Jupiter Ascending qualifies as a schlock or awe episode. Is that?
You know what? Let's do it as schlock or awe. Let's.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. It is a movie that has definitely aged better. You know, it got such bad reviews, and it seemed like such a travesty, but now it's kind of miraculous in how weird and I'm not going to use the word bad. I'm not going to say it's bad.
I have never seen it, so I'm looking forward to this.
Every time I think about it, though, I always want to do my Eddie Redmayne imitation, which is just, he does this thing where he talks really soft and then he talks loud. That's his acting in that movie. That's my Eddie Redmayne imitation.
Man's won an Oscar on, okay, clearly.
Not for this movie.
Yes. Fair enough.
All right, and then we're going to actually talk to Annalee Newitz. We're doing a rare Space Nation interview with Annalee Newitz, who... trivia I went to grad school with, now like a full-on SF author, and has a new book out which is called The Terraformers, and we'll be talking about that. Dan, what else is on our agenda?
Beyond that, we are, I believe, going to be doing the San Junipero episode of Black Mirror.
Yep.
And then I think The Flash.
I think we're going to do The Flash. I mean,
it's possible we'll skip that. That might be reviewer dependent. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I want to tell people we're doing the Pitch Black series.
We are doing the Pitch Black because we're going to transition to hot sci-fi summer.
That's right.
And so we'll be doing all three Riddick films: Pitch Black, The Chronicles of Riddick, and just Riddick. Actually, I really hope they make a fourth one, and I hope the fourth one is called Just Riddick.
I thought you were going to go with like a shorter form of Riddick, like Dick.
Our Dick, yes.
The titles just get shorter and shorter. We are taking suggestions from people about what we should cover as well. Although theoretically, we've actually planned out to next year, but it's all very theoretical.
We've got some ideas. We call audibles a lot here. And one of the other ways we call audibles, Anna, is that sometimes our patrons suggest things and we actually listen to them and think about doing them. Now, I'm not going to lie, Anna. I'm not as keen about the patrons right now because one of the things that's going on our Discord channel is them discussing the myriad ways they would like to eat me after our Yellow Jackets episode. But I think
it was a fairly brief discussion, to be honest.
Okay, let's put it this way. If you, the listener, also wants to talk about devouring me, consider becoming a patron. Because by becoming a patron, you're not only supporting the podcast, you get access to the Discord channel where you can, I'm half expecting by the time this is released, a separate channel is created
Dan
called
Eats.
Eating Dan.
Yes,
recipes.
Exactly. Dancipes.
Yeah. Dan Book.
Dan Book.
The Dan Cookbook. Yeah.
It is a wonderful Discord. Please, no one judge it just by that particular thread.
No, that's actually a little bit anomalous, and I think our Discordians are delightful.
I thought you were going to say that we had our first real life IRL meetup of Discordians recently.
Oh,
and some people are saying they might meet in Boston.
I know.
August.
This is an interesting possibility, and I might be open to this. Going to have to check my calendar.
STNCon.
STNCon could happen. That's going to be on the calendar.
All right. Anyway, to be on the Discord, which is wonderful, and not just about sci-fi, it's about a lot of wonderful things. People also just get on there to complain about stuff. We have a channel called Hated It. And we also have a channel called Day Jobs, where I've discovered some of the many interesting things our patrons do, including we have someone who works at NASA, there's a toy designer, there's people that work in human relations, there's people that work in conservation. It's real fun, and they love answering questions about what they do for a living, unlike me. who sometimes lies to strangers about what I do for a living. So I'm really proud of them.
Wait a minute. I want to know what is the most outlandish lie you've made about what you do?
No, I don't make it outlandish because I just don't want to. It's like if you're on an airplane and someone asks you what you do and you say I'm a writer, it doesn't stop there.
That's true. Yeah.
But if you say I'm in IT, it stops.
Okay.
Or corporate insurance.
Yeah, that's always a good one too.
That is actually what my ex-husband did, and no one asked him a second question.
That's a horrible epitaph for something. No one asked him a second question.
So sometimes I just go with corporate insurance. I sell corporate insurance.
Fair enough.
And then if you don't want to talk about it, people aren't suspicious. Whereas if I'm like, yeah, I'm a writer, and they ask me where I write, and I'm like, people. And then if I tell you, understand. But, people understand the can of worms that can get opened once I start talking about it.
But you know what, Anna? I do know one of the places you write, which is at AnnaMarieCox.com, which is one of the places.
That was a great segue, Dan.
That you can reach Anna. Thank you. That you can reach Anna. We are also both available sort of on social media. Now, thanks to Anna, we are both on Blue Sky. So if you're on Blue Sky, hit us up.
Where we retain our handles from Twitter, right? You're
exactly
Dan Dresner or D.
I'm Dan Dresner. You're Anna. No, I'm Dan Dresner.
Dan Dresner. I'm Anna Marie Cox, and AnnaMarieCox.com. Exactly. I'm also on Instagram as Anna Marie Cox. I teach a writing workshop, which is on hiatus until the fall. But if you're interested, my website has more information. Dan, there's something else you do. You teach. I remember that.
I teach, but I also have a Substack. It's called Dresner's World, and feel free to subscribe to that if you're so interested. It's a lot of fun content, I think. Anna?
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm doing okay, Dan. We have hit our first 100-degree days here.
Oh.
Which seems like it's earlier than last year, but you know what? There's never a time where a 100-degree day feels like it should happen. So
yeah.
It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I am once again sort of engineering my life around just not going outside. And everyone who points out that I used to live in Minnesota, it is better to be this is better than too cold. that's just who I am. Some people feel the other way. I would rather deal with this misery than the other misery.
I will say the one summer I lived in Austin, the parallel to a winter in New England was striking to me because basically you just didn't go out that much.
Yeah.
There was no point. Yeah.
You just do, but the big difference, Dan, big difference is that you don't have to do an hour of preparation to leave the house.
This is true. That is not an insignificant benefit. I grant that.
Absolutely. And I always feel kind of bad when I default to weather when people ask how I am. I'm also just going to say I'm doing stuff like I have a new column. I write for New Republic, and I'm now a columnist for NBC.com as well. So
I'm going to do the Muppet Kermit dice.
Can you see me celebrating, Dan?
Yes, I can.
All right,
I can. Unfortunately, you can't see me because in the answer of how I'm doing, I am in Amsterdam right now, which means that Anna and I are recording this. It's not a euphemism
for anything.
No, that's not code for anything. I'm literally in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, which means that we have a technical issue in terms of how we're recording this. We are using what us in the business like to call SHW, which is shitty hotel Wi-Fi. So hopefully you will be hearing this, and hopefully I will sound okay, but we make no promises, and I do apologize in advance for that. But I realize that being in Amsterdam, this is actually almost the perfect place to talk about what we're going to be talking about.
That's right. We haven't talked about what we're going to be talking about yet. I don't think we mentioned it. Oh, no, we did. Right up at the top. Right up at the top.
Yeah.
Right at the top. Nimona. Dan, why are we talking about Nimona?
Well, there's a couple of reasons on it. First of all, it's Pride Month.
Yes.
And this graphic novel, as we will talk about, has certainly some implications for talking about that. Second, my daughter Lauren, who is super queer, by the way, cannot stress that enough. Because we were thinking about Pride Month, Anna suggested that I ask her what would be the appropriate thing to read for sci-fi for Pride Month. And so I texted her, which is how I do most of my communication with my daughter at this point. And her immediate response was this book. And I really like making my daughter happy, Anna. So it seemed appropriate to do this. Also, my daughter is so smart that she picked this and we agreed to do it. And I think unbeknownst to both of us until we started reading it, Netflix is releasing a film version of this at the end of this month.
That is correct. And it's a a long delayed project. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And we are accidentally topical. We are very rarely on purpose topical, but every once in a while we hit a news cycle. And I think back to when I worked at Time magazine and how proud my editor would be if I hit a news cycle. That was a big problem for me when I worked in mainstream magazines. I was like, hey, are you think anyone's interested in this, story about people who sell underwater bananas? I don't know. That's just a weird thing I made up because that would be interesting. But I would just go to my editors with like random stuff and they'd be like, well, what is it? Like, is it what's in the cycle? Like, what's the hook? Yeah. It's not like banana month, For people who aren't in the biz, you got to have a hook.
Yes. If we form a band, I think our band name should be Accidentally Topical.
All right. I have a couple good band names coming up here. Actually, we'll be talking about. Okay. Yeah. All right. Dan, second question. Will this podcast ruin the book if you listen to the podcast before you read the book?
So my answer is I don't think so. But that said, it's also a quick read. So maybe just read it. There are a few plot twists. There's no denying that. And so in that sense, probably maybe read the book first. But I would say that I think the thing about this book that struck me is that it's really about the vibe. And we'll talk about that, but you're going to only get that by reading it. So what about you, Anna? What do you think?
I would say Dan, how long did it take you to read this book?
I think 2 hours, maybe 3.
Yeah.
I mean,
come
on. That wasn't interrupted.
Unless you're driving right now.
Yeah.
I would recommend stopping this podcast and going to read the book.
Yeah.
If you're driving, you might still go listen to a different podcast and then read the book and then listen to this podcast. Or don't listen to a podcast.
By the way, I assume it does not. I assume it does not exist. I hope there's not an audiobook version of this because that would be horribly wasted. This is a graphic novel. There should not be an audiobook version of this. Read the damn book. And by the way, read it physically. Get an actual copy of it.
Yes. Dan, do you want to do a sidebar about, we talked about this a little bit like offline.
Yeah.
About how we both had a physical copy. I don't always have a physical copy.
Right. But this created problems for both of us because, so it will not surprise listeners perhaps to know it's a professor's, tick, which is normally if I read something, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I will mark that fucker up. I will take a pen and I will underline things and put notes and so on and so forth. The exception is graphic novels. I cannot mark up a graphic novel. It just seems wrong to me for a variety of reasons. Part of it, I think, Anna, you when we were talking about offline, you hit on, which is literally the paper.
Yeah. It's too nice.
Yeah.
It's too nice. Yeah. So you dealt with it somehow, though, because you actually did produce this script.
I did. And the way I dealt with it, which is sometimes I do this, I'm really good, but like normally I don't. I was literally writing the script in real time in the sense of I'm reading it and then I'm like, okay, I have to type stuff up. So like anything that I remember. And then I would keep reading and then I would add. And so it was an iterative process. How did you handle it, Anna?
I used Post-its. And then in a few places, I used a very nice pen to just make a little like asterisks. Mm-hmm. Little asterisks. I felt like I needed to use a good quality pen. It's not like a fountain pen, but like a good quality pen.
Right.
I want to tell people, only reason I stopped reading hardcover is that I moved 3 times in 2 years. And that made me very aware.
And books are heavy, Anna.
Books are heavy.
People might not know that.
Books take up a lot of space in a moving van.
Yeah.
And I also figured out a way, like Kindle finally has a way of interacting with it that makes note-taking pretty easy. And I can use an Apple Pencil. I can actually write like notes. But marking, I can't not mark up a book I'm reading. That is true, even if it is a e-copy. So we are like that. We are kindred in that way. That is true. All right. Previous experience. I think neither of us knew much about this.
No, I mean, it was a first-time reader, and it was only as I was reading it, however, that I do remember this book being glued to Lauren's hip for a spell while she was reading it, and then rereading it and rereading it. So I remember vaguely her period where she was into it, but that's it. What about you?
Vague knowledge of it, just as like a person who used to read a lot of science fiction blogs back when there were blogs. Remember this came out. There were blogs.
I'm vaguely familiar with the blog concept.
So I used to read like IO9, where Annalee Newitz used to be an editor.
I think she was like the editor, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not going to answer firmly. We can talk to her
Right,
about that. Her interaction
Yeah.
with Gawker. We both worked for Nick Denton. That's also like a weird thing about
Ooh,
us.
that'll be a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to this.
Also, it's funny. I'm actually a little insecure because she was a staffer at the Marxist student publication I worked at Berkeley. Sorry, it's really more Gramscian. It was actually really more Gramscian. If you want to
Gramscian. Well, now I get the envy. Okay.
Yeah,
now
it was called Bad Subjects.
Oh, that's pretty good. Okay.
And yeah, and so like her like critiques of like she has a vocabulary for critiques of capitalism that like I've kind of like as a history major like I was much more like let's talk about stuff. I mean, I love critiques of capitalism. Don't get me wrong, but there was like a lot of non-theoretical stuff for me.
Well, it sounds like you were more of a materialist as opposed to if she was the Gramscian. So that would make sense.
Exactly. Thank you.
All right, let's get to the story behind the story. Anna, it is hard to believe that this was Nate Stevenson's first graphic novel. In the immortal words of the film Say Anything, how did this happen?
Dan, it started like all cool things in the early teens did. On Tumblr.
Fair enough.
He had a Tumblr called Ginger Haze. Nate is a fellow redhead, a fellow ginger. And it started, well, actually, it started before that. Started when he was in high school. And it was a sort of daydream thing. It was sort of toying with characters. Nate was assigned female at birth and already kind of knew that wasn't working exactly. And so we had a lot of ideas about cosplaying and working those things out. And the Nimona character was the first attempt to kind of really kind of like figure out what would be comfortable. And it is interesting that idea was a shapeshifter. Yeah.
So, I mean, when he wrote this, was this supposed to be about gender or trans issues just intentionally or
accidentally or what was going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so it was published in 2015. And I should be clear. So at first it was Tumblr, then it was a webcomic. And then while he was still in art school, it got optioned by HarperCollins and became a bestseller. Yeah. And so pretty cool career. And since he's transitioned, a lot of people have asked him that exact question, right? And he has a really funny entry on his Substack.
She said it, everyone. She said Substack twice. This is amazing. Keep going.
The Substack is called I'm Fine, Just Understand, which I think is hilarious. And it's a lot about mental health and coping with all kinds of things. And he writes about his transition. And the most recent entry with the movie coming out is his recounting like how everyone asked him if Nimona was supposed to be about transness. And his first response was always, oh, no, like, isn't it funny that happened? But I was really just like thinking, I was just writing a story. Like, I just was having fun. And then he goes back and goes through the correspondence that he did while he was doing Nimona. And there's things like he refers to Nimona and Blackheart as guys, like these guys. And someone pipes up, oh, how does Nimona identify? And Nate responds, oh, I was just using the term guys, just, guys, gender inclusive guys. And then the real time Nate sort of interrupts himself to go, oh, buddy.
I like to think that he probably said, dude. I don't know. Yeah.
And then there's another time where he draws Nimona as like a really butch, like almost like Viking looking character. And someone pipes up with, so like, what's going on? Like how actually asked a question about how does Nimona identify? And the answer at that time was, oh, she's been a cat. She's been a dragon. She's always Nimona. She identifies as a she for now. And then the real time Nate goes, oh, buddy. Oh, buddy. So he has a lot of compassion for his younger self. And of course, people have found, I mean, once you see it, you can't not see it. And the themes are there. And I mean, there's at least one doctorate I saw with Nimona as part of the exploring transness in comics, field. So,
which is legit impressive for a book that just came out 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Which also gives rise to the question: what has Stevenson done since then?
Well, people may be familiar with his other projects, which include She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, as well as Lumberjanes. If you are
yes.
comics adjacent,
okay,
as you are,
Lauren loves Lumberjanes. I remember that. So okay, yeah.
And then I think perhaps of most interest to our audience, he did a webcomic series called The Broship of the Rings, which which no longer fully exists, but if you Google it, you can find it. And it is sort of what it sounds like. It's the hipster Lord of the Rings. And I won't try to describe everything because like nothing's really worse than trying to describe like a funny comic, but I'm going to do that worst thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they have these two remarkably skinny hobbits talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them says to the other, "What do you mean you've never heard of second breakfast?"
Okay, that's legit funny.
It's really funny.
Good.
So, still doing cool stuff. I believe is involved with the movie, which gives me some confidence. After I finished this, I was like, I wonder how this is going to go. You know,
it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
You know, we can always do an emergency like special version of like, you know, extra little bonus episode of it.
Speaking of things emerging later, Dan.
Oh, damn.
Thank you. Chekhov's What's It is the thing that appears in the first act and then reappears in the third act. Dan, what do you got?
I have Chekhov's anomalous energy device. What about you, Anna?
I believe that is a very good, very literal Chekhov's What's It.
Yes.
Mine are always less literal. I think it's because you usually go first.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
mine is enough. Chekhov's shark with boobs.
Listeners, I wish you could see hopefully this will be on TikTok. Your gesture that you did when you made sharks with boobs.
Well, he actually did an interview. Reading the interviews is really fun. He's clearly like a cool dude. And he was talking about how the first time he saw like someone on like in film, like someone have a shark with boobs like out in the world, you know, that he didn't draw. Like how like amazing that was.
That's fair. I get that.
It's a very good joke at the very beginning of the book, which we are now going to talk about. Man, the segues, they're just coming fast and furious segues.
Jesus, we are good. Okay. All right, let's get to the jacket blurb. This is, which is what we do with books, and this is definitely a book. Here we go. It's not easy being Ballister Blackheart, Anna. You've lost an arm from a joust with Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin. Side note here for listeners, when I first wrote this and sent the script to Anna, she refused to believe that the name was actually Goldenloin. She thought it was Golden Lion, which I have to admit, from the perspective of like, sort of fairy tale names, you would expect Golden Lion much more than Golden Loin, but it's that kind of book. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
It's also like how, there was some gender fuckery happening.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And I just didn't see it as sometimes my naive little eyes refuse to see.
Fair enough. You've lost an arm from a joust with your, best friend at the institution's academy when he cheated, in fact. Your villainy career seems to be in a rut. And then out of nowhere, Nimona shows up. She is ready, willing, and eager to be Ballister's new sidekick. Lord Blackheart is skeptical at first, but Nimona's shape-shifting abilities prove quite handy. As Blackheart and Nimona get to know each other, we realize that Nimona is way more powerful than she originally let on, and that maybe the good-bad typology that defines this universe might not be properly calibrated. It turns out the institution has been doing some super shady shit with, how do you pronounce this, Anna?
Well, I now know it's pronounced jade root.
But
when I was reading the book, I thought it was really weird. I couldn't figure out where the nomenclature would be for jade root. Like
it's Dutch. That's definitely Dutch.
Why would you call something jade root? Especially, I thought, when you have the word jade right there.
I'm sorry, listeners, and I'm sorry, Anna. I couldn't resist that. All
That's
right.
okay. Sometimes I used to say Mosaic until I was like in my 20s too.
Oh, so the word used to mangle was paradigm. I would say paradigm.
Paradigm? It is a paradigm sometimes.
No. I would say paradigm. That's how bad it was.
Sorry.
Much worse.
That for some reason that's like funnier because that's just
Yeah.
wrong.
Oh, it is. It's way wrong. It's way wrong. But like that's how I said it in my head, and I almost said it in a class. Unfortunately, someone interrupted me and mispronounced the word, and then the professor said it, and so I was saved.
You were in college before you knew that's not how you pronounced it.
Yeah, I never said. Well,
we forget. Yes, I also now kind of remember being introduced to the idea of a paradigm and being like, oh.
Right.
It was a paradigm shift for me to know that there was such a thing as a paradigm.
It's a paradigm, exactly. Yeah,
all right, keep going, Dan.
After multiple encounters with Nimona, Blackheart becomes concerned at her powers, and the Institute's director orders Golden Loin to waste her. That turns out to be even more difficult than anyone had imagined. Instead, the institution captures Blackheart, using him as bait to trap Nimona. This appalls Golden Loin, who is demoted for his ethical qualms. Nimona is captured, but the Institute's efforts to study her blood backfire when just that tiny piece of her is able to shapeshift into a dragon that wreaks serious havoc across the kingdom, killing both the king and the director of the Institute. Blackheart manages to free himself and uses a device from his new friend Dr. Meredith Blitzmeyer to defeat the dragon. It looks like the rest of Nimona died in the lab destruction, but at the hospital, Blackheart realizes that she survived. The disasters make clear the institution's really shady use of jade root, and Blackheart becomes a hero. Blackheart and Blitzmeyer found a lab together, and Golden Loin and Blackheart become closer. The end? Anna, does that about sum it up?
I think so. I will note that apparently it is canon now that Golden Loin and Blackheart were more than friends back at the Institute. So there is that, and he is also named Golden Loin, as previously noted.
Yes.
And then the only other thing that I will add is sometimes, Dan, when I'm reading for the show, there comes a time when in the margins where I want to write is Dan, ?
Aww.
I've said this before, and it's when I feel like I've spotted IR. And I thought we might talk about this later. You don't have to answer it now, but he gets the people to revolt pretty easy. That was
Blackheart does this, yes.
Yeah.
We will talk about this later. I do want to add at this point that Anna, the difference is that when I'm reading and I see something that I think might be a critique of capitalism, I write Anna, but with an exclamation point. Because I'm so excited.
I like it. Yes. I like that a lot. Yes. But I think that's pretty good. I mean, there is some double, triple crosses and traps and stuff, but it's a very straightforward book in its narrative.
Yeah, I think the other thing that changes, I think we agreed on this, is that the tone shifts considerably as the book goes on. I mean, the book starts in a sort of extremely playful, sort of impish way, much like Nimona, but it doesn't. And it actually kind of sneaks up on you. But like by the second half of the book, you realize this is a lot more serious than, that what's going on underneath is a lot more serious than perhaps you had originally anticipated, both about Nimona and the other characters. So that I also particularly liked.
And I guess we should probably say something about the drawing, Dan.
We should, which is, I'm not going to lie, when I started reading this, I was like, okay, this is not a sort of classic graphic novel in the Alan Moore or Frank Miller Watchmen kind of thing, because it isn't. But I have to admit, again, the drawing I think also shifted a little bit as the stakes go higher. Would that be a safe way of putting it?
Yeah, it's funny because like if I had to like quickly describe it, I would say in some ways the drawing gets bolder and more dramatic.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it.
Aesthetically ambitious. It's almost like you're seeing his drawing style develop as it goes along, but it also fits the tone of the book and Nimona's tone, which actually that brings us to our next question, Dan.
Yes, how is this science fiction different from all other science fictions? So there's a couple things. First of all, in terms of the perspective of this podcast, this is the first graphic novel we've done, I believe. Is that correct, Anna?
It is, and we definitely should do more, in part because it was, well, you know what? I have read some Alan Moore graphic novels. I was about to say this was a fast read. We should not trick ourselves.
Yeah, that's true.
Not all graphic novels are fast reads, but we should do more of them. Yes.
Yeah, that's true. But I think the way in particular that this is different is the sort of mashup in science and magic. You know, this is both science fiction and science fantasy. And it's unusual, I think, in some ways to see them combined quite like this. So that was interesting. And also the mashup of, for lack of a way of putting it, sort of like a classic fairy tale setting of a kingdom and then present day media. And which again made me realize, oh wait, it's the Netherlands again. Because that is kind of how I've been feeling these past couple days in Amsterdam. But I have to say, one of the things about these two mashups is that it actually works on a deeper level in terms of the themes, because it disorients you seeing science and magic together. And it causes, at least me as the reader, to think, oh, okay, well, what else might be like being subverted? Which is important because this book is a serious subversion of all the sort of fantasy tropes that dominate the genre. And in some ways, that's at the core of the book. And at this level of sort of mixing science and magic, it actually succeeds in even further subversion.
And of course, it's the subversion of gender norms as well.
Absolutely.
The book sort of asks, actually, very almost explicitly, like, what is natural, right?
Right.
Like, what is
Nimona.
What is true nature? What is someone's true nature? Can you and how, and if we know someone's true nature, should we expect them to conform to our idea of their true nature? This phrase, by the way, dear listeners, true nature, is used in the book, and again, apparently not with a lot of conscious thought by Nate, but definitely hits at conversations that we are having literally right now here today. And maybe later we'll talk more about reading this while living in Texas.
Yeah, that's fair.
I do want to say one more thing about how it's different, but this is just a quicker way of saying what you were saying, which is the good guy is not a good guy, the bad guy is not a bad guy, and the sidekick is not a sidekick.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. But the other thing that's fascinating about the book is that they're all talking about this, because the bad guy thinks he's a bad guy, the good guy thinks he's a good guy, the sidekick wants to be a sidekick, and yet they all sort of have to struggle with the fact that maybe that's not what their identity actually is.
And maybe their identity isn't just something like a thing either. What if that were true? All right. Oh, Dan, there are other characters.
There are. So the characters that I liked, there was Nimona, obviously, who is just a force of nature. And again, like one of these things where when you're first introduced to her, she seems sort of like she seems like a sidekick. I mean, that's what she's sort of advertising herself as, which implies sort of impish, wisecracky, and so on and so forth. And yet one of the miracles of this book is that you realize it's about her and it goes deep. And so and her pain in particular becomes a really powerful feature of the book. The other two characters I liked were Blackheart, who was the very epitome of lawful evil as a D&D character, except as the book goes on, you realize it's way more lawful than evil. And so,
so not epitome, like in the graph, he's like low on the X axis and far on the Z axis. Y
I think
axis.
That's how it works. Y axis,
Y. Z is the other three-dimensional axis,
right? Which
we're not measuring right now.
We don't have a 20-sided die for that. No. But and then also as an academic, God knows I identified with Blitzmeyer, who was every academic ever in terms of just let me do my research. I don't care about anything else. I'm not paying attention to the news and so on and so forth. And I identified with that.
Yeah, having been raised by an academic and been in that world as well, I kind of miss it sometimes. Actually, like
it has its charms on it.
That's true. I think that there could have been some more better fleshed out characters in this book.
Golden Loin was like underwritten, I think would be the best way to put it. And for that matter, I would say the director
of the Institute.
the Institute, who's the true big bad in the end. Some better justifications for why the director does what she does.
She's literally a shadowy figure.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think she's ever drawn in full light. I am assuming
I think you're right.
Which maybe I shouldn't. But I wish we had more from her. I kind of wish we had more from Blitzmeyer, just because she's almost pure comic relief.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
It's funny for a book that starts out as whimsical as it does, like towards the end. It's nice to have those notes.
Yeah, that's true.
Comedy come through.
Speaking of characters that would have been nice to be fleshed out more, like the king it's not a character. It's like just at some point it's referenced that the king is dead, and I was like, wait a minute, what's the power structure going on here?
Your day job was calling to you there.
Exactly. What I kept thinking was actually that Monty Python Holy Grail scene where it's like, we're an anarcho-syndicalist structure, like that. The rotating executive.
Well, we'll talk more about that, Dan. We'll talk more about what the power structure there was. Any more characters? I don't think so. It is a slim book. There aren't a lot of characters, but I have a question about what else there might be in it, Dan.
Oh, please ask away, Anna.
Is there IR in this book?
Anna, no one will take you seriously if you're too afraid to kill anyone, or so big murder would have you think. Which is to say that there's some IR in this book, but it's IR that is designed to, in fact, be subverted. So take that line from Nimona, for example. This is what one of the things Nimona says to Blackheart early on in the book. In actual international relations, my colleague Erica Chenoweth would stoutly disagree with that claim. And she's got some data to back that up, showing that, in fact, nonviolent protest and nonviolent social movements are often far more successful than efforts at armed rebellion. So that's one area in which the standard expectation of the way IR is supposed to work does not actually fit with reality. The whole weapons development as deterrence logic in the book also doesn't really make any sense. So this is the director claims that they have to torture Nimona in order to figure out how she ticks so they can create a weapon in order to deter adversaries. But of course, as was pointed out in the book, they are not at war with anyone at that point. They don't appear to have any enemies. And so I guarantee you that developing a weapon is a surefire way of triggering a security dilemma, because it'll force all of your adversaries to say, wait, what are you doing? No, we're going to do this too. So no, that's not going to stand put.
An R&D race.
Yes, exactly. An
arms race. Actually, that's literally an arms race, though, right? I mean, like if you're developing arms, that's an arms race.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely an arms race. Yeah. And so that's unhealthy. But I do think the most interesting IR in the book, and this is something you referenced before, is Blackheart's efforts to discredit the Institute. So the way he does this is it turns out he learns that the Institute was, in fact, experimenting with jade root. So he manages to essentially plant poisoned fruit with the jade root and, get into the population, which then leads to this media firestorm, which then leads to the uprising against the Institute. And Anna, my understanding is you found this problematic.
Well, number one, I would point out, it's a fucking false flag attack.
Yeah. Okay. That turns out to be true, Anna. Okay. Sometimes.
Which is what everyone who does a false flag attack says.
Everyone who's ever done a false flag says, Anna, sometimes you have to lie to tell the truth.
That's right. Yes. That's right. Yes. You don't always use the word Anna, although weirdly, you'd be surprised how often I get those calls.
You would be. Yes, I can imagine.
Just out of the blue. So funny it's not funny that's a false flag attack. Also, I want to say that he does a non-toxic, or I guess it is toxic. He does a non-fatal version of the poison.
Right, which was the first
particular.
Yes, I mean, again, he is lawful evil in the sense of he doesn't want to kill innocent civilians, and so he does make them sick. Not the greatest move, but
now I mean, there is a beautiful logic to a false flag attack, right? I mean, manipulating people that way. Yeah. That's why it's been done so often in American history. Dan, podcast for another time, but
yeah.
Does jet fuel melt steel? Damn, that's
God!
I'll leave it there. I'll just drop it there. Just dropping it there.
Oh.
But I did think that, however brilliant that attack was, the people sure seem willing to flip because he does it. So there's a scene at a jousting tournament, right?
Right.
and people start to get sick. And basically he takes over the airwaves and does a kind of like a little bit of a, you could have rolled this one out of AI speech about rebellion, right? Like,
right, or Vias for victory or something.
If you like asked ChatGPT to write a rebellious speech, like, right, give you something like this, just not Nate's finest moment, not Stevenson's finest moment, and then people then rebel, and that seemed a little like, I don't know, as someone who likes to see people rebel, Dan. Like, I didn't know. So, I maybe again the false flags. That's why they work so well.
So
why we've never noticed them.
First of all, I have to admit, the way you were describing it, I realized that essentially the revolution starts because there was a poisoning at a Renaissance fair on it. So,
if only it were that simple.
If only it were that simple. So that, but not exactly.
Poisonings happen at Ren fairs all the time, I'm guessing.
I mean, those mutton legs can't be good for them.
Not a lot of hygiene.
No.
No. I think the food safety department's doing real stringent checks at the Ren.
Yeah, there's a whole other discussion about like what's actually like valid at a Renaissance fair when we're getting way off topic. So I'm going to leave that to one side. But the way I would put it is that there are two ways to think about this. The first is, if I'm doing the work for the book, you could argue that since the Institute was doing a whole bunch of super shady shit, it's not surprising perhaps that the population was primed to rise up. There are instances in which it might seem like an autocratic leader is in charge, and indeed it might seem like the population is okay with it, but secretly they're all seething. And if there is some particular like spark that causes everyone to go out to the streets, that can cause, I don't know, the Berlin Wall to fall and things like that. So that's possible.
Okay. Touche, Berlin Wall.
Yes, I went there. But I will say this, really what Blackheart is doing with this is not causing people should not have caused people to necessarily go out to the streets so much as cause a massive erosion of trust in the Institute. And that's not great for the Institute, but it also doesn't automatically lead to, uprisings. Or, God forbid, it leads to uprisings that wind up being, horrible, like January the 6th.
I will say it is definitely true that Blackheart becoming a hero in the aftermath of the attack may not have happened without that, push of the erosion of trust that happens because he does the false flag attack. I will continue calling it that.
There you go.
The end.
Fair enough. But this gives rise to a different question that I actually have to ask you on.
Oh, Dan, what is it?
Is there a critique of capitalism in this graphic novel?
Dan, we assumed that capitalism was an economic system disguised as a monster. But it's really a monster disguised as an economic system.
Anna, I have to say, of the responses you have crafted during all of these episodes, this one might be one of my favorites. Yeah. Thank you.
That's interesting to me.
I know.
Bookmark that for later.
Yep.
Given our various positions on the whole capitalism thing.
True.
I actually don't have a bunch here on this. I did think about, because this book is so much about subverting norms and assumptions, I did think about how, in a lot of fiction and in the world, the lack of a description of something means we assume it is like what we always have seen, right? That is heteronormativity, for instance.
Right, yes.
Perhaps there's such a thing as capitalism normativity. So when a system is not described, so when economic normativity, so when a system is not described, we just assume that it's the same system that we're used to. And I confess, I read Nimona and just assumed that there was some sort of capitalist system happening there. And I could kind of do a critique of that system. Apparently, there's obviously some big flaws in whatever system is going to produce something like the Institute, right? But, different economic systems can produce the same kinds of flaws. So perhaps there's something else happening in this kingdom that we do not know the name of.
I think that's true. Also, I got to say, the Institute is not really an economic creation. I mean, that's more on the politics side of things. So
I agree. And I'm saying, depends on who's getting those defense contracts, Dan.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
If we really wanted to dig into it.
No, the magic industrial complex is something that we're going to have to talk about at some point, and that's a fair point. Yeah. Okay.
There does seem to be some kind of universal employment plan, obviously, with some agency somewhere sending Nimona to be a sidekick. And obviously there is a very generous funding of scientific research and development, because apparently that is also something that people can do just all day long.
That's just a good policy, Anna.
It is good policy. I think it makes good policy even in a capitalist society, but
Right.
it's funny, it doesn't actually serve capitalism in the way that late stage capitalism wants to be served, so we don't do it. Let's move on a little bit. I'm going to bring the tone down.
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, I read this graphic novel here in my home in Texas, where last legislative session, it became illegal to provide gender affirming care to trans kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to get surprisingly emotional about, maybe not surprisingly. Mm. People are leaving the state as they should. Mm-hmm. I'm consider myself very lucky to not have kids. Well, I'm consider myself lucky to not have kids for a lot of reasons, but it is grim. It's a grim time for parents of kids who are different, and for many, maybe a variety of reasons, but who just don't read the way that society expects them to be read. And that's one of the reasons I kind of identify in that I'm not necessarily, and I haven't necessarily been what society wants me to be. And I've been things that are deemed to be bad and monstrous. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. I have bipolar disorder. I do know the feeling of like the thing that you are being depicted as monstrous. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Nimona talks about in the book.
Yeah.
And so for those kinds of reasons, both the atmosphere that I'm reading it in and my ability to identify with Nimona, at least on that level, I found the scene where she basically goes on a rampage. And I meant to say this earlier. One of the things that's interesting about the book, about the way the tone changes, is that when she kills people at the beginning of the book, it's kind of like, haha, comic book killing.
Right. Yeah. It's like an MCU kill.
Right. It becomes, the stakes get real. Yeah. Like, you start to realize, oh, no, this is like, people care. Like, we're not supposed to read this as MCU death.
Right. No, it's not. It's an emotional shift. There's definitely an emotional shift that happens during the book where you realize, no, we're no longer talking about this. We're talking about something else. And that's it. Yeah.
And it's a very affecting scene where, Blackheart is trying to tell her that I don't think you're a monster. And she's arguing, no, I am. Right. I am a monster. And I do want to be this way. It's the reflecting back at society, the violence that people have done to you. Right. Yeah. Because we see a little bit of Nimona's backstory in a flashback, and she has a story that a lot of kids who ever felt different would relate to. I mean, heightened for the purposes of a comic book, or graphic novel. And it did make me, and the fact that Stevenson doesn't shy away from that violence, like kind of forces us to see Nimona doing that violence and still love her. Mm-hmm. Reminded me of something that I think we often forget in Pride Month, which is that we have Pride Month in June because that's when the Stonewall riots were. Mm-hmm. You know this. I know you don't forget, but nope. I think some people do. Yeah. That the proper Pride display is not a store window filled with merchandise, but a store window broken with a brick, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what they did at Stonewall, is they threw bricks. And that's what that community needed to do, which is a trans community also. That is another thing that people sometimes kind of don't know about Pride, is that the Stonewall riots, it was a gay bar, but the specific, crackdown was on trans women.
Yeah, right.
So I am, I don't like to cry when I read a book. And I don't necessarily enjoy thinking about the violence that's been visited upon the people who are like people that I love. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a pretty powerful moment in this novel, and I'm glad to have it put before me to remember during Pride.
The way I would put that, Anna, is that how do I put this? There are ways that you can cry in a book where that are like exploitative, or there are easy ways to do it. This doesn't take the easy way to do it. I would say it goes deep, and to the extent that you might tear up if you're reading Nimona's sort of self-loathing almost, at times, it's earned. And so, yeah, on that point, I would definitely agree with you. The last thing I will say about this is, as we said, my daughter Lauren recommended this to me, and she is both rather queer. She's also on the autism spectrum. She is, as you said before, on a different child in some ways. And I think I perhaps understand her a little bit better than I did before reading this book. And I understand the parallels between her and Nimona. Not that my daughter can shapeshift, but
well, all young women have a certain degree of shapeshifting.
That's fair, yes. But but let's put it this way: my daughter A has that same sort of impish sense of humor as Nimona, and the potential rage at the heart of Nimona. I've occasionally seen that with my daughter, but one of the nice things about watching her grow up is watching that rage, stay mostly holstered and instead be expressed as joy. And I guess the way I would put it is that I'm very happy that my daughter lives in a world that is not quite as cruel to her as that world is cruel to Nimona. And that's the only thing you can ask for as a parent.
Dan, I'm glad that you helped create that world for her.
Oh, it's mostly my wife, but
See, I was going to get all emotional about what a good dad you are, but apparently you're just average.
I'm average. I'm okay.
Perhaps even trending to bad, as we know on the Discord, where you're the absent father.
The absent father who will be eaten. Wait, what's that noise?
It is some sort of magic device.
Yeah, it's an anomalous sonic device.
Anomalous sonic things. Discordant.
It's time for Discordant Notes. This is when we take a question about what we're talking about from the Discord and answer it in the podcast. And this question is from Shugoff. What theme/story beats does Stevenson get to explore with the mashup of genres that we've talked about previously on this podcast, which is a great question. I have two thoughts on the answer. The first is that one of the things I really like is this novel actually explores some of these sort of real world consequences of what are sort of basic genre elements. So one of the things I legitimately loved was the fact that the bank heist that Nimona and Blackheart engage in leads to a bank run, which you never see in standard sci-fi or even science fantasy. And that was the one time I think I laughed out loud reading this book. I really did like that. And the other thing is in some ways the sort of deeper exploration of how genre, can impose constraints on individuals, how it really winds up causing them to constrict their own identity in ways that are actually not true to themselves. And we see this most obviously with Blackheart and Golden Lion, particularly Blackheart, who thinks, oh, okay, I've followed this narrative arc. I must be a villain. I will do the villainy things. But it's very clear his heart's not in it, and he's not really a villain. And he has to be freed from that construct, much in the same way that Nimona has to be freed from the sort of sidekick construct as well.
I don't have anything very deep to add, except I always like being reminded that to a certain degree, science is magic. That there are these things that we do that seem like magic or would have seemed like magic. I mean, it's cliche, but seeing yes. Blackheart invent his own phone at one point, he does a phone potion.
That was good. Yeah.
Reminds us this stuff. Yeah. All of this had to be invented. All of this had to come from somewhere, which maybe actually is a deeper observation than I realized, because that's one of the things that the book explores, right? Is all of this has to come from somewhere. People create the systems that we live in. They create the things that we live in. They have a source. Yeah. It's not just hey, the phone appears, and even with magic, someone has to create it. Oh, it's money raining from the sky, Dan. Dan, it's money from that bank heist. You hear it? Yep. Golden gold raining down. That's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt somebody. It's the debris field. Are we talking about the stuff we haven't already gotten to talk about?
Yep.
I'll be honest, Dan, it's a short book. We've talked for a little bit. I don't know how much I have. What do you got?
I don't have a ton. I've got, one thing, I suppose, I've got two things, I think. The first is, one of the things I did like about the book is that it really does sort of jump right into the story rather than having a ton of world building. It's just Nimona pops up and, says, hi, I'm doing this for you. And it almost felt like I was reading it starting at page 40 rather than at page for. And so that was, I suppose, intriguing.
I got my phone potion in. I think the drawing is, like we've talked about before, the drawing kind of, it doesn't just grow on you, it kind of changes. Yeah, and I don't know, don't mark up a graphic novel. Anything else?
Yeah. I have one last thing, Anna, and this is important. Lauren, I love you very, very much. And I'm so proud that you recommended this to me because it's a great book to read. And as I said, I think I kind of understand you a little more from having read it. So thank you.
Happy Father's Day, Dan.
Oh, thank you, Anna. Happy Father's Day to your dad as well.
And until next time,
keep this channel open for more.